Hello and welcome to another Team 08 hand review session. Today the theme with this player that we're looking at is playing too timidly towards the end. It's a mistake I see a lot of players make. They slow down and start folding too many hands just because they're on the bubble or near the money. Anyway, let's get right into it with this hand here. It's an 18 seat turbo sit and goes again. Our player here has less than 4 blinds. He's effectively coming last given the position of the blinds. So he really needs to be jamming this hand in here. What does he do? And he folds. With less than 4 blinds, he pretty much should be jamming any 4 cards at this point. So yeah, that's a mistake. Anyway, let's move along. Again, the very next hand, our player folds that. Let's take a step back. Again, with less than 4 blinds, and essentially coming last. We have slightly more chips than the guy on our left, but we hit the blinds first. We're on the bubble. We need to chip up or go home, and with 2 small cards in our hand and 2 big cards, I mean, again, it should be any 4 cards, but this hand is even better than some of the others we would jam. Anyway, let's move along to the next hand. Okay, again, let's see what happens here. Limps, and our player jams at last. Yay! That's that's a good play. And your opponent folds. Doesn't matter if he'd called. Again, with this stack this small, we have to get it in. I'm glad to see our players done it this time. Here we are on the very next hand again. Let's see what happens here. Our player folds. No. We've got a deuce 3 in our hand. We have plenty of equity. Just hoping this guy's going to bust before us is just a mistake here. We need to put the pressure on. Against his desperation calling range, our hand will stack up fairly well, especially with the 3rd best starting low. That fold is another mistake. Okay, let's move along. Okay, it's a couple of hands later. We're still on the bubble. Let's see what happens here. Fold. Our player folds again. I'll just take that back. We should be jamming here again. The hand charts say it should be jammed, and it should be jammed. Look, there's if you add up the pot here, look, there's 1,450 in the pot. If this guy here, we fold, he jams and just steals the blinds and antes, then we're right back in the same position that we were a moment ago, where we're close to coming last. Of course, this guy up here does hit the blinds before us, but still, when the game is this close, you've got to keep playing hands. And when you get a hand with an ace and 2 wheel cards, and we've got a suited queen in there, I mean, really, we've got all the equity in the world. The hand should have been put in, or the stack should have been put in there. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, it's a little while later. We're in the money now. See what happens here. Okay, our player calls. Good. That's a correct call at those odds. You basically call with just about anything. So yeah, I'm happy he's getting some chips into the pot at last. Let's keep moving along. Okay, it's a bit later. Let's see what happens here. And yes, our player jams. Good. Glad to see he's starting to get into gear. That's a good jam. Double suited hand with a nice connected small cards. Stands up relatively well against any kind of calling range there. So good. Glad to see he's putting some chips in. And a little while later, we're coming last. We're desperate. Hopefully, with this tiny stack, barely 2 blinds. Yes, he does get it in. Good. Okay, let's move along to the next game and have a look at the end game there. Okay, we're at the next game. We're not quite at the end game yet. Let's see what happens here. There's a limp, which is unusual, but could be strong. Our player folds. Just rewind that. Now, sometimes players do limp as some sort of trap, but there's no need for us to jam over the top. We've got a big suited ace with a deuce. If we're on the button, we should at least call there and take a flop. So that's giving up a bit of value there. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, and here we are in the bubble. And we have an interesting situation. We've got a stack up here with less than 2 blinds, and a guy down here with less than 1 blind. So even though we've got a hand I would normally jam at this stack size, a fold would be okay here. Let's see what our player does. Yep, and I'm quite happy with that fold with these two smaller stacks who are, one of them is about to bust. We're on the bubble. I don't have a problem with that. That's a good use of ICM there. Generally, I'm not a slave to ICM myself, but there are some situations where it just doesn't make sense. And playing a pot now on the bubble when one of these two guys are going to go bust in the next couple of hands, most likely this one here, because this guy up here with just over 1.7 blinds is probably going to wait for the guy with less than one blind to bust out. So in this case, this is one of the few cases where I don't mind the fold. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, it's a little while later. Both those short stacks have busted. We've got less than 3 blinds in our stack, so we should be getting all in regardless of the action. Almost regardless of the action. If those two big stacks went in against each other, I'd fold. And he jams here, good. I'm quite happy with that. Let's move along. Okay, player got lucky jamming in a short stack. That's a little while later. Let's see what happens here. Oh, he folds. Let's just rewind that. We've got the chip lead. This guy here is not going to be eager to call a jam from us. And we're going to have a ton of equity over this guy's desperate calling range. So I would jam this here every time. Remember, we're not just trying to limp up one position in the money. We're still trying to win the tournament, or the sit and go in this case. So, yeah, I would jam here. Like I said, this guy is going to have a very tight calling range because he doesn't want to bust before the shorter stack. And this guy's going to have a wide calling range, and our hand is going to stack up very well against that wide calling range. So, yep, folding there was giving up value, just playing a bit too timidly again. Anyway, let's move along. And it's the very next hand. Let's see what happens here. Small blind jams. Oh, our player folds. Look, I would actually call here. Now, let's look at some equities. Now, even if we put our opponent at the top end of his range with an ace-deuce type hand, we're still basically coin flipping. There's enough overlay in the pot to compensate us, even if he's at the top of his range. And we have the chip lead and we can take the player out. So I would absolutely call there with that kind of equity. And remember, this is putting our opponent at the high end of his range, and there's no need to think that he's necessarily that strong. So yeah, I would have called that one. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, we've made it to heads up. We've got a short stack. I hope our player gets this stack in. When we're this short, we basically play any 4 cards, and a pair of kings is certainly good enough. Oh, good, he does make the call. Glad to see it. Interesting thing to note that our opponent understands his ranges pretty well. It's a good jam from our opponent with small cards and well connected and suited. Anyway, let's move along. All right, it's the very next hand. Again, we've got a high-only hand, but we've got a pair of kings. We're suited. I hope our player gets his stack in. He does. Good play. Like I've said before, when we're desperate, we've just got to play every hand. And when you're under 5 blinds, you really don't have much of a choice, especially heads up. So, yeah, quite happy with that. Let's look at one more. Okay, it's a few hands later. We're still struggling. We're still desperate. And we've picked up a reasonably nice hand here. We've got a suited king, 3 small cards. I'd be jamming this every day of the week. Oh, he folds again. There's no reason to wait around. I mean, their hand is plenty good. Anytime you've got just a couple of small cards, if you can win either side of the pot heads up, when you've got a short stack like this, you really should be jamming. Anyway, so the message for this player when he sees his review is to not play so timidly in the end game. And remember, when you've got you don't need an ace in your hand to be able to play when you're short stack. Remember, 3 deuce is the 3rd best starting low, and it doesn't have an ace. So it's ahead of ace 4 on the low. So you really need to be looking when you get especially under 5 blinds. Anytime you've got a couple of wheel cards, or if you're double suited or even just single suited, you've got to be playing these sorts of hands. You've got to chip up or go home. You can't sit around and wait and just try and hope that everybody else busts out for you. So anyway, that's my message to this player is stop playing so timidly. towards the end of the game. Anyway, if you'd like to know more about what we do with training players and staking, that sort of thing, check us out on the website at team08.com. Bye for now.